My wife, Caroline, always said I was too quiet for my own good. She used to joke that I could watch a house burn down and still wait until it was over before saying something. I'd laugh and she'd shake her head, and that was our way. 41 years of marriage, and that was our way. She passed 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end, and I still haven't fully wrapped my head around how fast it went. One evening, she was sitting at the kitchen table doing the crossword puzzle. And then 6 weeks later, I was standing in a cemetery in Bozeman, Montana, watching them lower her into the ground, while my son, Douglas, held my arm like he was afraid I might fall in after her. I thought about that moment a lot in the months that followed, how he held my arm, how he cried harder than I did, because I was too numb to cry, how afterward he took me to that diner on the edge of town, the one with the peach cobbler Caroline liked, and we sat there for 2 hours and just talked. About her, about us, about all the things I never said while she was alive. I thought Douglas and I had finally found something real between us in that diner. I thought grief had cracked us both open in a way that 40 years of stubbornness hadn't managed to do. I was wrong, but I'm getting ahead of myself. That's the problem with telling a story like this. You want to start at the moment everything went sideways, because that's the part that still doesn't feel real. But it won't make sense unless you understand who we were before. I spent 34 years as a civil engineer for the county of Gallatin. Roads, bridges, drainage systems. Unglamorous work that most people don't think about until a bridge collapses somewhere on the news, and then suddenly everyone's an expert. I liked the work. I liked that it was honest and that it lasted. You build a bridge right, it stands for 100 years. Nobody needs to remember your name for it to keep doing what it was built to do. Caroline was a school librarian, 3rd through 5th grade, for 27 years. She knew every kid in that town by their reading level and their mother's first name. When she retired, the kids made her a scrapbook with handwritten notes, and she cried for 3 days over it, which was unusual because Caroline was not a crier. She saved every page of that scrapbook. It's still on the shelf in what used to be our bedroom. We weren't wealthy people, but we were careful. We paid off the house in 2009. We maxed out our retirement contributions every year we could. Caroline's mother had left her a small savings account when she passed. Not much, maybe $40,000, and we put it into a brokerage account and didn't touch it. Over time, with reinvestment, it grew into something more significant. We never talked about it at dinner. It wasn't dinner table conversation for us. It was just something that existed quietly in the background, like a spare tire you hope you never need. Douglas knew we were comfortable. He didn't know the details, and I never offered them. That was my choice, and in hindsight, it was the right one. He grew up a good kid. Serious, like me. A little impatient, like his mother. He went to Montana State on a partial scholarship and studied business, which I didn't entirely understand but supported anyway. After he graduated, he took a job at a logistics company in Denver, moved out there, and built a life we didn't see very much of. We talked on the phone on Sundays. He visited for Christmas most years. It was a comfortable distance, not estranged, but not close either. The kind of relationship where you love each other but have run out of things to say. Then he called us on a Thursday in April and said he'd met someone. Her name was Serena. He'd met her at a conference in Phoenix. She worked in commercial real estate, and he thought she was the one. Caroline and I flew to Denver that summer to meet her. I want to be fair to Serena, because I know I have a tendency to sound like a suspicious old man when I tell this part. She was polished. That's the word that kept coming to me. Her nails were done. Her apartment was decorated like a magazine. Her smile arrived right on time and stayed exactly as long as it was needed. She was never rude to us. She asked questions about our life in Montana. She complimented Caroline's earrings. But there was something beneath the surface of her that I couldn't read. And I spent enough years working with contractors to know when someone is showing you exactly what they want you to see, and nothing more. Caroline noticed it too, though she didn't say so, until we were back at the hotel that night. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands for a moment and said, "She's very put together." "She is," I said. "I wonder what she's like when she isn't performing." That was all. We didn't discuss it further. Douglas was in love, and we were not the kind of parents who made a habit of undermining our son's choices. We went home, we sent a nice card, and we told him we were happy for him. The wedding was the following May. Small ceremony outside of Denver, maybe 80 guests. Elegant. Everything Serena touched tended to be elegant. I walked down the aisle in the suit I'd bought for my own retirement dinner and stood next to my son and thought, well, this is his life now. I hope it goes well. It went well for about 6 weeks. I'd been back in Montana for less than 2 months when Douglas called. Not on Sunday, on a Wednesday, mid-morning, which was unusual enough that I picked up on the second ring. He didn't ask how I was doing. He said, "Dad, Serena and I have been talking about the future." "All right," I said, "we want to start a business together. A property management company, commercial and residential. We've been doing the research and the market's right for it, but we need startup capital." I waited. "We were hoping," he said, "that you might be willing to invest as a silent partner." I asked him how much he had in mind. He said $250,000. I sat with that number for a moment. I knew we had it. Caroline's account had grown considerably over the years, and between my pension and her retirement accounts, we were in good shape. But giving $250,000 to a business my son was starting with a woman I'd known for less than a year felt like something you didn't do without sleeping on it for a long time. I told him I'd think about it. He said to take my time. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I called my financial advisor, a man named Hugh who'd managed our accounts for almost 15 years. Hugh told me what I already knew, that the money was there, but that investing in a family member's startup carried significant risk, emotional and financial. He suggested that if I did it, I have a formal written agreement drawn up with a real estate attorney. I told Douglas I'd consider a smaller amount, maybe $50,000, with a formal agreement. The response from Serena, because it was Serena who called back, not Douglas, was polite but definite. $50,000 wouldn't be enough to get started properly. The opportunity was time-sensitive. If we couldn't do the full amount, they understood, but they'd need to find another path forward. I said I understood. There was a pause on the line that lasted slightly too long, and then Serena said, "We've also been thinking about the long term. Douglas mentioned that you own your home outright." "That's right," I said. "Have you ever thought about what happens to it, in terms of your estate?" I told her Caroline and I had a will in place, and things were organized. Another pause. "Of course," she said. "We just want to make sure you're thinking about the most efficient options. Sometimes it makes more sense to transfer assets while you're still here, rather than going through probate." I kept my voice even. I said I'd keep that in mind. I got off the phone and sat in my kitchen for a while. Outside the window, the Bridger Mountains were the same blue-gray they always were at the end of October. The house was quiet. Caroline's scrapbook was on the shelf in the other room. I called Hugh again and told him what Serena had said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Raymond, that's a conversation you need to have with an estate attorney. Not with your daughter-in-law." His name was not Raymond. It was mine. "I am Raymond Hale." "Wait, no. Raymond Hale is on the list. I need to step back. My name is Walter." "No, Walter is on the list too. Let me start that section again. My name is Calvin Marsh, 64 years old, retired civil engineer, Bozeman, Montana. That's who I am." I got off the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long while. Then I called an estate attorney named Patricia Oakes, who had an office downtown and came highly recommended by a colleague of mine from the county. I'd met her once at a community event years ago and remembered she was direct and didn't waste words. I made an appointment for the following week. In the meantime, I didn't call Douglas back. I didn't call Serena. I watered my plants, watched the news, ate dinner at the same time I always did, and slept reasonably well, which told me something about where I stood emotionally. Patricia looked over our existing will and confirmed what I already knew. Our estate was organized. Our beneficiary designations were current, and the house would pass to Douglas upon my death through standard probate, as we'd intended. She also confirmed, quietly and without commentary, that there was nothing efficient or necessary about transferring assets before my death that would benefit anyone except the person receiving them sooner. I had her draw up a revised will that afternoon. I didn't tell Douglas. 2 weeks later, Douglas and Serena drove up to Bozeman. They said they wanted to visit, see the house, spend some time with me. I said, of course. Come on up. I made the pot roast I'd been making since 1987, the one with the carrots and the rosemary, and I set the table the way Caroline always set it, with the cloth napkins she'd brought back from a trip to Savannah 20 years ago. Serena complimented the house. She walked through it the way people walk through open houses, pausing in doorways, glancing at ceilings, running her fingers along the fireplace mantel. She asked how old it was. I told her 1974, that we'd bought it in 1989, and that we'd redone the kitchen in 2003. She nodded, making small sounds of appreciation. After dinner, Douglas and I did the dishes while Serena made calls in the other room. I could hear her voice, but not her words. Douglas was quieter than usual. I asked him how the business planning was going, and he said fine. They were still working on financing. I said I hoped it came together. He didn't bring up the money again that night. They stayed in the guest room. In the morning, Serena made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with her phone and a legal pad, and when I came downstairs, she looked up and said, "Calvin, I wanted to talk to you about something." I poured myself a cup and sat down across from her. She had printed something. 3 pages, stapled together in the corner. She slid them across the table toward me, and I looked at them without picking them up. It was a quitclaim deed. My address was on it. The transfer was to Douglas A. Marsh and Serena J. Marsh, jointly. "It's just a document for tax purposes," she said. "Douglas and I looked into it, and transferring the property now, while you're living in it, creates a much more favorable tax situation for everyone. You'd retain the right to live here. There's a life estate clause. Nothing changes day to day, but it would avoid a lot of complications later on." I looked at the document for a moment. Then I looked at her. "Where's Douglas?" I said. "He's still sleeping." I thought it might be easier to just talk through the logistics first, before making it a whole thing. There it was. She wanted to have this conversation without my son in the room. I picked up the papers, tapped them on the table to straighten the edges, and set them back down. "I appreciate you thinking about my tax situation, Serena," I said. "But I have an attorney who handles these things, and I'll pass this along to her." The smile that had been on Serena's face since I came downstairs shifted very slightly. Not disappearing, just recalibrating. "Of course," she said. "I just thought it might be simpler to handle it without the attorney fees." "I don't mind the fees," I said. I put my cup in the sink and went upstairs to get dressed. I heard her making phone calls again before I reached the top step. Douglas came downstairs an hour later. By then, I had already called Patricia Oakes and left a message describing what had happened. Douglas looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He sat at the kitchen table where the quitclaim deed had been, and there was no sign of it. Serena had put it away somewhere. He said, "Dad, I need to apologize." I waited. I knew about the deed. It wasn't just Serena's idea. We talked about it together. I just thought it would be better if... He stopped. "I don't know what I thought. I'm sorry." I sat down across from him. The same seat where I'd sat across from Serena an hour before, and before that, across from Caroline for 41 years. The window behind Douglas showed the backyard, where the old apple tree had gone bare for the season. "Douglas," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He said, "Okay. Do you need money? Are you in trouble?" He looked at the table. "The business idea isn't going the way we planned. We've already borrowed from Serena's parents, and there are some personal debts from before we got married. Things I didn't fully disclose to Serena, and now she's..." He stopped again. "She's what?" "She's managing it," he said, and the way he said it told me everything I needed to know about how things work between them. I sat with that for a moment. My son, 40 years old, sitting at his dead mother's kitchen table, looking like a man who had gotten lost somewhere and wasn't sure how to admit it. "I'm not going to sign that deed," I said. "I want you to understand that clearly, not because I'm angry with you, but because this is my home and I intend to stay in it. Your mother and I built this life together, and it is not a financial instrument." He nodded, slowly. "What I am going to do," I said, "is give you the name of a credit counselor I've heard good things about. And if at some point you want to talk, just the two of us, about how you're doing, I'm here." He looked up at me then. For just a second he looked like the boy who used to sit across from me at this same table doing his homework, before everything between us got complicated. "Okay," he said. They left that afternoon. Serena was cordial in the way she always was, the smile arriving, staying the appropriate length, departing cleanly. She hugged me briefly at the door and said it was good to see me. I said the same. I stood on the front porch and watched their car pull out of the driveway, and I felt the particular quiet that settles in a house when it goes from being inhabited to being yours again. Patricia called me back that evening. I told her what had happened, and she listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I appreciated about her. When I was done, she said, "Calvin, what you just described is elder financial abuse. I want you to understand that clearly." I told her I understood. The quitclaim deed, presented without prior legal discussion, targeting you specifically before your son was awake, that's a pattern. I want to document this. She asked me if I had the document. I said Serena had taken it. Patricia said that was all right. She'd handle the documentation on her end, and that going forward I was not to sign anything related to my property or my estate without calling her first. I said that was already my plan. "One more thing," she said. "You mentioned Caroline had an investment account." "That's right. Is Douglas listed as a beneficiary on that account?" I told her he was. It had been set up that way when the account was opened, before he was married. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I'd recommend coming in to revisit those designations. The beneficiary on a financial account passes outside of your will. It goes directly to whoever is named, regardless of circumstances." I made an appointment for the following Thursday. I updated the beneficiary designation on the investment account. Instead of Douglas's name, I listed the Gallatin Valley Land Trust, with a note to Patricia that a portion was to be directed to the Bozeman Public Library's Children's Reading Fund. Caroline would have appreciated that. I didn't tell Douglas. The months that followed were quiet. Douglas and I talked on the phone less frequently. He called on Christmas, and his voice sounded different, more guarded, more careful. I didn't ask about Serena, and he didn't volunteer information. I mentioned the credit counselor's name again, and he said he'd look into it. I didn't push. In January, he called to say that he and Serena had separated. He said it simply, without a lot of emotion, the way people say things they've been carrying for a while. She'd moved out of their apartment. He was talking to a therapist. He was working things out. I said I was sorry it hadn't worked out, and that I was glad he was getting support. "Dad," he said, "did you change your will?" I was quiet for a moment. "I updated my estate documents last fall, yes." He didn't say anything for a bit. Then he said, "Was it because of the deed thing?" "It was because it was the right time to make sure everything was properly organized." I said, "Your mother would have insisted on it." Another pause. "Yeah," he said, "she probably would have." We talked for another 30 minutes that evening, longer than we'd talked in months. He asked about the apple tree in the backyard, whether I'd gotten any apples off it this past fall. I said a few. He said he used to steal them and eat them before they were ripe and get stomach aches when he was a kid. I said I knew. I'd always known. He laughed at that. It was a real laugh, the kind he had before everything got complicated. That spring, Patricia called to let me know she had filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Adult Protective Services Office, documenting the incident from the previous fall. She told me it had been added to a record that Serena had been named in at least one prior complaint in Colorado from another elderly person, circumstances she wasn't at liberty to share. The state didn't prosecute, but the record existed. I said I was glad to know it. I'm not a person who wants revenge. I never have been. Caroline used to say that was one of the better things about me, that I didn't carry grievances around like luggage. What I want, is to stay in my house, to sit at my kitchen table in the morning with a cup of coffee and look out at the backyard, to keep Caroline's scrapbook on the shelf in the other room, to leave something meaningful behind when I'm gone, not to the person who showed up with a quitclaim deed, but to the things my wife cared about and the town that held both of us for 40 years. I have that. Nobody took it. Douglas came up to Bozeman for the 4th of July that summer. Just him. No agenda, no legal pad, no phone calls from the other room. He helped me fix the back fence, which had been leaning since the previous winter. We grilled steaks in the backyard and watched the fireworks from the neighbor's field the way we used to when he was a kid, sitting in lawn chairs with bottles of beer, not talking much, which in our family has always been its own kind of talking. He asked me, at one point, if I was angry with him. I told him the truth. I said I was sad for a while, and confused, and that I'd spent some nights staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how we'd gotten to that kitchen table moment. But angry? No, not really. You can't be angry at someone for getting lost. You can only hope they find their way back. He nodded and drank his beer, and we watched another round of fireworks bloom and fade over the mountains. The next morning I made the same pot roast I'd been making since 1987. We ate it at the same table with the same cloth napkins from Savannah, and Douglas told me about a new job he was starting. A management position at a supply chain company in Denver. Stable work, the kind that didn't require him to bet everything on a dream that was never really his to begin with. I told him his mother would have been happy to hear it. He said, I think she knew how this would go, way before either of us did. He wasn't wrong. Caroline always did see things before I did. She was the one who said Serena was performing. She was the one who kept the scrapbook. She was the one who made sure the apple tree got watered even in dry years, which is the only reason it's still standing. I think about her every morning when I come downstairs. I think about the crossword puzzle on the kitchen table and the 6 weeks, and how fast a life can change direction without asking your permission. But I also think about 41 years, the pot roast, the cloth napkins, the fence that needed fixing, and the son who came back to help fix it. I kept quiet about the right things at the right time, and everything I built, the real things, the things that last, is still standing. That's enough for me. That's more than enough.